You do hang on a second. Today, I'm going to do a brief overview of the CLG program and how it fits in with the National Historic Preservation Program framework, and then talk about some CLG success stories from 3 different communities. 2 of them that are also Main Street communities, but then one I just thought had some great preservation successes recently. So I'll look at Montrose, La Junta, and Otero County. But first, just a brief introduction to the Certified Local Government Program. It's a federal program run through the National Park Service, and then it's administered by each state historic preservation office. So the State Historic Preservation Office in Colorado is History Colorado. And then we work with our local governments in our state. In Colorado, we have 68 certified local governments. And you can see on the map that there's 6 counties and the rest are towns and cities. And then there's about 2,000, well, there are exactly 2,099 CLGs nationwide as of 2 or 3 weeks ago. There are probably a couple more now. There's a mix of urban and rural communities in the Certified Local Government Program, and the Certified Local Government Program is really meant to support creating a preservation program that fits with your local community's needs. But just to back up a bit and talk about what historic preservation is in sort of the national framework that we have through the National Park Service. So historic preservation is the study, documentation, designation, protection, and physical preservation of buildings, structures, which include things like bridges and water towers, sites, which sometimes are associated with archaeological sites, but it could also be battlefields, mines, ranches, things like that. Objects, that would be things like statues and fountains. Districts, which are collections of all these other types of resources. And then preservation in the United States falls under a federal framework defined by the National Historic Preservation Act, which was passed in 1966. And this creates partnerships between federal, state, and local governments. It also defines standards to use across preservation, which are known as the Secretary of the Interior standards. But under this federal framework, the protections for your buildings in your community generally happen at the local level. So if you are listing something on the National Register of Historic Places or the state register, that doesn't necessarily automatically protect those places or prevent demolition. The design review and regulation happen at the local level. So that's why our local preservation programs are really important. So if you're looking to set up a local historic preservation program, here are some of the different elements that are involved. The first step is really passing a historic preservation ordinance that creates a historic preservation commission. It describes its powers and duties, and then also establishes basic processes to follow for things like landmarking and design review. So that's when you're reviewing alterations, relocation, or demolition of properties.
Lindsay, sorry to interrupt. Would you want everybody to kind of hold questions till the end, or what do you think?
Oh, yeah, let's do them at the end. I think that'll be easiest.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to check.
Yeah, I'm happy to take questions at the end. So yeah, you would look at passing an ordinance that establishes a historic preservation commission. Then another element of local preservation programs is survey. So that's the process of locating and describing historic resources and why they're significant. And basically it lets you know what you have. So you can't, have historic preservation without knowing what resources you have in the first place. Next is designations. That's where you're creating landmarks and historic districts. Design review. So like I said, that's reviewing any alterations to properties, relocation, and demolition. Incentives. There's an array of local incentives like local grant programs, facade improvement programs, sales tax rebates, property tax rebates, having zoning or planning variances, that you could offer, that some of those would be part of your town or city budget, but some could just be like making the process easier for property owners with historic properties. And those incentives go along with state and federal incentives that are available, like grants and tax credits as well. And then the last element of your local preservation program would be advocacy and public education. So reaching out to your local community and making sure that they know that there's a historic community, that that their property might be historic, and that there's different, that there's value in preserving your historic areas. So of course you can have a preservation program without becoming a certified local government, but the CLG program is meant to support preservation programs in our local governments. So if you're interested in becoming a certified local government, here are some of the benefits of the program. So the first one is certified local government grants. And essentially, the State Historic Preservation Office gets funding from the federal government, and we are required to put 10% of that funding towards subgrants for the Certified Local Government program specifically, and we get a match from the State Historical Fund. So we're able to offer no match grants to our CLGs, and these are for things like preservation planning, surveys, education, and outreach projects. So it's not physical construction work, but it's projects that help the government plan their preservation program and do outreach and kind of move their programs forward into the future. Another benefit is CLGs are able to apply for National Park Service grants. They've got a variety of grant programs, but those are things like the Save America's Treasures grant, the Underrepresented Communities grant. They have an African American Civil Rights grant and History of Equal Rights grant. So I think they have like 10 different grant programs that CLGs are able to apply for. Another benefit is your local landmarks and contributing properties in your local historic districts are able to are eligible for state residential and commercial tax credits. And if you're in a rural area, those are up to 35% of the qualified costs. So your property owners doing rehabilitation work on their properties could potentially get, a third of the money back through tax credits if they're locally landmarked in a CLG. There's access to Compass, which is our statewide cultural resource database. So that basically tells you what information we know about the history of your local area. Training, there's scholarships available to go to the Saving Places Conference and other training opportunities around the state. And then I and my colleagues here at History Colorado do a lot of training and outreach in different communities as well. Technical preservation support, so you can reach out and I will help you find the best resource to answer your questions about preservation. A formal role in the National Register review process, and then commenting on federal undertakings, which is known as the Section 106 process. So basically, if there's a federally funded or federally licensed project in your area, then you can participate in the process to comment on whether you think it will have an effect on historic resources. On the flip side to that, the responsibilities as part of the CLG program. So enforcing your own local preservation ordinance, part of my job is to make sure that everybody follows their own rules that they've set for themselves. So I basically check in on the local governments and make sure they're following their own ordinance, their own code. Establishing and maintaining a historic preservation commission. These can be combined with other commissions in your community, but they need to have at least 5 members and meet at least 4 times a year. Send meeting minutes to me. I look at everybody's minutes and see what common issues are coming up, or if there are any questions that I can help answer. Provide for adequate public participation, so making sure that you're following appropriate open meetings laws and have public participation in any preservation planning projects. Maintaining a system of survey and inventory, so making sure you're regularly going out and seeing what you have in your community, if there's been any big changes over time, things like that. Like I said, we help provide funding for those projects. One person from your CLG needs to attend training at least once per year, and then submitting an annual report. So the basic steps in becoming a CLG are first to have a historic preservation ordinance adopted. Second, start meeting as a historic preservation commission. Have a list of preservation goals for the next like 5-ish years, maybe 5 or 6 goals to try to work toward. Then you submit an application and status request memo to our office, and your community would adopt a resolution to become a CLG. And then all the materials are reviewed by our office and the National Park Service. And the agreement is signed between the local government, the state, and the National Park Service. And a local government is able to pull out of the CLG agreement at any time if you decide it's not the right program for you. So many Main Street communities are also CLGs. I've got those highlighted in orange here on the screen. The programs really go hand in hand because the goal behind each is to create community vitality and revitalization of historic areas in your communities. And I think both programs really encourage community participation in these efforts. So next on to some CLG success stories. The first one I wanted to highlight was the city of Montrose. They reorganized their Main Street program in 2017, and it's now known as DART. With that reorganization, really focused on offering a variety of local incentives. I think they just have done a great job in identifying incentives that they can offer to their local business owners to try to encourage reuse of their historic downtown area. Their preservation program was sparked by their Main Street involvement. So once they reorganized Main Street, they decided to adopt a historic preservation ordinance in 2018. They have a historic preservation commission that has designation and design review powers that would be outlined in their ordinance. And they became a CLG, I think in December of 2018, and were able to apply for a CLG grant right away for a survey plan. A survey plan basically gives direction moving forward in your survey program. So if your community's never had any survey before, it would help you decide where you want to prioritize your efforts. And it also gives backing for grant funding. So when you're applying for grants in the future, you can say, oh, our community identified these priorities in our survey plan, and that will help you get a grant. And Montrose has also designated 10 properties as local landmarks since becoming a CLG. So that has helped them with offering property owners incentives as well. So following that survey plan, they applied for a grant, for a CLG grant to survey the Tortilla Flats neighborhood in 2021. This is a historically Hispanic and Latino neighborhood that was really important in the Chicano rights movement. They were able to get pretty robust community engagement in this underrepresented community. And they had like 30 or 35 people show up to their survey meetings, which for a survey project is quite a lot. So their community is really passionate about being able to celebrate this neighborhood and learn more about the history that took place there. Based on the survey, the neighborhood was determined eligible for the National Register. So that opens up additional future opportunities. If they decide to move forward with designation, then the property owners would be eligible for incentives such as residential tax credits. Like I mentioned before, those would be for up to 35% of the rehabilitation expenses if people were trying to fix up their homes. And then for any public buildings, if they're designated, then they would be eligible for state historical fund grants potentially. Local designation also opened the door for additional projects currently going on in the city of Montrose, and that includes the Montrose Potato Growers building. That was locally designated in 2019 and then listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2020. They've received state historical fund grant money in 2021. And because they're on the National Register, they're eligible for both state and federal rehabilitation tax credits. So they can layer all of those incentives to be able to rehabilitate this building and put it to a new use. And then currently going on, there's some rehabilitation work with the Montrose Knights of Pythias building that was locally designated as a landmark. in 2022, and that makes it eligible for those state tax credits, but is also determined eligible for the National Register. So if they decide to move forward with that designation, then they would be able to have access to the federal tax credits as well. So those are some great current projects in Montrose. Then next, I wanted to highlight the city of La Junta. They're, I guess, kind of interesting to me, at least as a CLG, in that they layer all these different programs together and work together really closely with these different programs to revitalize their downtown area. So they have La Junta Rise, which is a Main Street creative district in their downtown area. And then they also have an urban renewal authority and a certified local government preservation board, and they all work really closely together. And with all these different commissions and boards, they've been able to secure some grant funding for rehabilitation projects in their downtown area as well. La Junta became a CLG in 2019, so fairly recently. And since very little survey had ever previously been completed, they decided to focus on their downtown area for their first major project. With the survey of 83 properties, much of the downtown area was determined to be eligible for a National Register district. And this was just a really excellent survey, and they had a great historic context study that looked at things like the commercial development of the area, railroad and labor history, and the city as a transportation hub, entertainment and recreation, churches and schools, fraternal societies, and then really importantly, they looked at the ethnic heritage of La Junta, looking at Chinese, Japanese, Black, and Mexican American communities there, and then also women's history. And they actually just received a Hart Award from History Colorado for this survey work. And I wanted to show this quick video that was made for the Hart Awards that does a really good job of explaining what historic resource survey can do for your community. There we go. So there are some future opportunities that come out of this survey work. The first one is public outreach and engagement, and then also celebrating your local history and community identity. So like they were saying in the video, there's this like big book of history essentially that tells you what each property was in the past, and helps you think about, you know, what it might be in the future. They can also build on that survey with additional work for sites associated with underrepresented communities. They can look at local, state, or national register designation that helps lead to incentives for their property owners. And then also helps with, you know, the community to celebrate their own local history and community pride in their local area. They can publicize incentives such as the state tax credits and the state historical fund grants, use the survey to help encourage preservation and rehabilitation. And then it will also help with citywide preservation planning. So, you know, the survey identifies which properties might be good, you know, first candidates to rehabilitate and try to put to a good future use. So that's La Junta. And then finally, I wanted to highlight Otero County because they have a really dynamic and engaging preservation program. And I thought it might help spark some ideas for your communities as well. So there are 6 county CLGs in Colorado. They often look at the unincorporated areas of the county, but you can also sign an intergovernmental agreement to work with your incorporated areas as well, just depending on what works best for your preservation programs overall. Otero County is a big participant in the Section 106 process. So they have a lot of federal activity, particularly related to the Army and also railroad activity out there as well. So they are really active in trying to ensure that their historic resources aren't negatively impacted by different projects that are going on throughout the county. And I think they do a great job engaging with that process. They've had quite a few previous survey and outreach efforts. So they did a big survey there that they then turned into 2 different driving tours, which I think is really cool. So that shows you how you can use that historic information and turn it into different products to use for outreach for heritage tourism. But they've also done a few different projects related to the study of Japanese American history in Otero County. They got a CLG grant in 2018 to do a survey and then a big historic context study, which is essentially a history that ties back to the built environment. So you'd be looking at like a history book essentially, but it also like points out specific parts of the built environment that is related to that history. They also have done oral history interviews with Japanese Americans and worked with Japanese American advisors in Otero County to try to find out what's most important to them in their local area. Through that process, they found out that the local cemetery in Rocky Ford was really important to Japanese Americans. It has a separate Japanese American section in that Rocky Ford cemetery, and then also has a specific Hispanic section as well. So it's a cemetery that's very important for its associations with different ethnic heritages. So they received a state historical fund grant in 2021 to nominate that cemetery for the National Register, which is supposed to actually happen later this year. So it's sort of a 2-year process that they've gone through. And then they're doing additional interviews and creating educational resources for the local community on the untold stories of Japanese Americans who are buried in that cemetery. So that should be really great. And then they just received a CLG grant earlier this year to create an educational workbook and a teacher resource manual for 3rd graders in Otero County, which is when they do their local history modules throughout the county. So they are going to draw on all these previous survey and historic context studies and turn that into a workbook so that the kids can, you know, relate to their local histories and see what happened in their local communities over time. I think that they felt like that was really important, especially in a rural area that you know, the kids would be taught, you know, national history and stuff like that, but not necessarily ever see that in a textbook, what's going on in their local area. So they felt like it was just really important for kids to be able to have pride in their local area and be able to see all the different histories. They've also been really successful in getting grants for construction projects in Otero County. So they've received or helped to shepherd the reception of different grants for the Masonic Lodge in La Junta. That includes a historic structure assessment, roof rehabilitation, fixing drainage issues, and planning for interior work to take place. And then the Masonic Lodge, so I think it's a long-term lease with a nonprofit who's then able to get historic preservation tax credits. And since they don't have a tax liability, they would be able to sell those tax credits to somebody who does. So they're planning to apply for preservation tax credits for that rehabilitation work as well. And then in the historic African-American homesteading community of the Dry, the Manzanola United Methodist Church has been a really important building there. They've received past state historical fund grants for different assessments and rehabilitation work, and then just received a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They have a specific Black churches grant fund. So they're doing a bunch of work there to try to keep that church going and you know, make it a vital part of the community into the future. So I think there's just a lot of exciting opportunities for certified local governments to support historic preservation, revitalization, and community involvement in your different local areas. And I know I'm just really excited about these different projects and other ones going on in our local governments. So thank you for attending, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lindsay. You know, I'm sure there's success stories like this in every community, you know. These were some really good highlights, though. What do you think are some things that lead to CLGs really taking off in a community? Is it like town support? Is there like, do you have to have local champions? Like, what is it going to take?
It kind of depends. Some of the CLGs don't have town staff. Most of them do, but yeah, I think that if you don't have town staff supporting you, then having some sort of succession plan, so it's not just one person, you know, taking on all of the burden of the activities going on, being able to share and create a preservation ethic in your local community so that there's people who are excited about preservation and all that it can do for your community. But I think, to me, there are a lot of communities that seem to have like a lot of energy but less direction. So making sure that you have a good preservation plan, even if it's just a list of goals that you're going to start thinking about and work toward at each commission meeting. It seems really basic, but just having a sense of direction is really important.
What kind of time would I be looking at if I was a town that hadn't adopted, you know, CLG program? What is required, like on a monthly or quarterly basis? How does that all work?
So you mean, well, each certified local government has to have a commission that meets 4 times a year. Some of them meet like twice a month and some of them meet just quarterly. So it just depends on what works best for your local area. I think, you know, if you're meeting quarterly, then you should probably have some like committees on the side that are keeping momentum going. Otherwise, it's just really hard to keep up any momentum with projects. But yeah, so it's not necessarily that like burdensome of a schedule, I would say. It just depends on what works best in your local area. And then you know, some communities have a lot of design reviews. So if you have a lot of local landmarks, then you might be doing mostly review of alterations of those properties to make sure that they fit in and are appropriate for the character of that historic property. So, you know, some of our larger communities and even I mean, like La Vida, some of the smaller ones too have a lot of design review. Yeah, like Lake City. And so they're focusing a lot on looking at those alterations, whereas other communities don't have as many local landmarks, and they're working more toward education and outreach for their local communities.
After the after the historic preservation ordinance is passed, how long is the process to become a CLG?
So I think the ordinance passing is usually the most difficult part, and that really depends on sort of the political situation in your local community and how much support preservation has. Then your commissions should start meeting at least, a couple of meetings after that, so maybe a couple months worth. And then I think we have like 45 days to review, and the National Park Service has 60 days to review the materials. It shouldn't take us that long, but Park Service is a little less predictable. So, maybe 3 months, I would say.
All right, thank you.
And one thing I'm curious about too is I know that the grants that you guys offer are just amazing because there's really no match, right?
Yeah, there are no match grants through the CLG program.
Right. Have you kind of compiled like a list of grants that are like, grant types, like this one was for a preservation plan, this was for a survey, like, all those different kinds of grants that people have applied for recently?
Yeah, we have a list of all the past grants since like 1985
Oh,
when
wow.
the program started. So certainly if people want to know about past projects, they've evolved over time, I would say. But yeah, and then we can help you get connected with consultants to be able to do the work. And you can also sort of see how much it costs to do these different projects too.
Is there anything you don't typically cover in a grant project? I mean, like, because would there be some component of, say, a survey that maybe wouldn't get covered, or stuff like that?
We're not allowed to cover food. So if you wanted to have like a big party at the end or something, we can't cover that. But yeah, I think we don't do, like I said, physical construction work, and we can't cover signs.
Okay.
And those are just based on, well, the physical construction is based on the amount of money we have, but signs and food are federal regulations.
Okay. I posted in the chat the list to your guidance materials, and hopefully everybody will click on that and have an opportunity to kind of look through what's there. You have a sample ordinance, which is fantastic, and there's different levels of that. So if you're looking to adopt a preservation ordinance, this is the first place to stop. Have your town attorneys look at it. It's nice that it's kind of done.
Yeah, and that ordinance is sort of like everything but the kitchen sink thrown in, but you can, pull here and there for what will work best in your community. So, some communities have highly regulatory preservation programs where you have to follow, to the letter what the commission says in order to get a building permit. And some of them, it's more of an advisory commission. So the property owners, if you're a CLG, still have to go to the commission to get advice on what they should be doing. That would be most appropriate for their property, but it's voluntary compliance. So the property owner doesn't have to follow the certificate of appropriateness. They can still get a building permit to do the work on their property. So it just depends on what works best for your community. And in that case, it would be more of a honorary program that gives your property owners access to incentives versus a highly regulatory program.
Cool.
Yeah, and sorry there is no audio on the video. I don't know how that works, but I'll just share the link to that in the chat too. At least there is closed captioning.
New message in here. Somebody has to jump off. Anyone else have any other questions for Lindsay? I'm sure I could talk with her all day about different things that she can do, because it's really pretty amazing the kinds of services that she offers through the program, and Yeah, I think if I was a community, I would be jumping on this and I would be going after these grants, maybe even on, can you do it like yearly, or do you have to kind of you have to wait for one to finish before you can ask for another? How frequently?
You could do yearly grants usually. So our grant period, it has been 2 years and now it's been extended to 3 years. So usually if you're doing a follow-up project, then you would apply like 2 years down the line. So we've had, like Golden has been working on an ethnography project for Native American history in their area. And so they completed the ethnography in they completed it in 2022, and they just got another grant to do site visits with tribal representatives for this year. So that's sort of like spaced 2 years apart with the follow-up phase. So you can definitely phase your different grant projects. And then, like Cortez has gotten like 8 different CLG grants to do survey work. So they have been applying basically every 2 years to try to get that survey work done in their community.
All right. Well, thank you. We really appreciate your time and putting this together for us. And yeah, do you can you put you want to put your info in the chat, or is there a way we can get?
Sure.
And I would like to promise everyone that I can get your get the presentation to you, but I'm new to using Zoom for our team. Also, I'll do my best. I'm sure everybody would like to have a copy of that, so I'll see what I can do and find that registration list. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely send the PowerPoint to you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, you guys tune in for the next 3. We're gonna have Preservation Month webinars. The following 3 weeks, we're gonna actually talk about the Secretary of this Interior Standards next week with some more folks from History Colorado. I'm going to be presenting the following Thursday on Main Street design, kind of a design 101 for Main Street communities. And then our last week, we're going to have some information on downtown streets, which will be really good. Our partners from CDPHE are going to be presenting that. So we'll learn about streetscape and all the wonderful things we can do in our communities. So anyway, thank you again, Lindsay, and everybody have a great day. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye.